Hello friends, my name is Fanroll, and today I want to talk about what is probably my favorite class to farm on, as well as play endgame content with. And that is the Engineer, as they can fill almost any role in endgame content, ranging from DPS to boon support to healers, as well as taking care of specific mechanics and duties in raids and strikes. In the open world, they're also my ideal jack of all trades. With the Scrapper Elite specialization, they are the only class that can maintain permanent super speed, and they have access to permanent quickness and on-demand stealth on top of that. So let's take a look at the trait lines I'm running, and let's kick things off with the Explosives trait line. This will buff any explosion attack, and as I usually play hammer or rifle, both of them grant access to this type of attack. On top of that, every first attack in combat will be considered an explosion as well. And explosions will do different things for us. They will give us fury, stack ferocity, and inflict vulnerability on our enemies, as well as granting us some healing over time. And enemies affected by vulnerability will take increased strike damage from our attacks. And to finish off this amazing trait line, we also get a 15% damage increase against mobs with a lower health percentage than ourselves. In case you're wondering, the bomb kit and grenade kit are of course buffed by this trait line if you like playing with those. The next trait line we'll be taking a look at is Firearms. This trait line is all about critical hits, as crits will have a 33% chance to inflict bleeding, and bleeding in turn increases our crit chance against enemies. And thanks to the Grandmaster trait, mobs will also take 2% increased damage for every condition they have. And this brings us to our elite specialization, Scrapper. This will give us access to gyros, which are wells that follow our character around. And with the traits we'll be choosing, wells will grant us super speed, and in turn super speed is gonna grant us quickness. A quick but important note on super speed, you can only stack 10 seconds of this buff. So make sure to stagger your gyro usage to not overcap super speed. And on top of everything, Object in Motion is gonna grant us 5% damage boost for having stability, super speed and quickness, which will stack up to a whopping 15% extra damage. So when you combine all of these traits, we'll have a character that runs at maximum speed both in and out of combat, and that has incredible burst to burst down any mob we see in the open world. And if you feel like you're too squishy, you can take Alchemy instead of Firearms. This trait line will buff elixirs, grant you protection, and heal you for every boon you receive. And the Grandmaster trait reduces damage for every boon you have, which will make you super tanky by sacrificing some damage. As I stated earlier, I like running either hammer or rifle when I'm running around in the open world. Whichever I run is honestly more dependent on my mood than anything else. Hammer offers better burst, it has a projectile reflect, a dodge, a block, and a stun through its 5 weapon skills. But a rifle does give you access to ranged damage. Both feel incredibly great to play, so feel free to play around with what you enjoy the most. And if you don't have much experience playing an Engineer, this is one of the classes that cannot weapon swap when you're in combat. So whatever weapon you're wielding is the one you're committed to as long as you remain in combat. Now, let's take a look at the utility skills we'll be running. And this is mainly centered around the open world, so we are going for convenience. We will be running the Heal Gyro, Shredder Gyro, and the Blast Gyro. These will automate some of our gameplay by offering us healing and damage, as well as blast finishers without having to think too much, and being wells, they'll also give us super speed and quickness. And the final utility slot is the one I play around with the most, depending on the content I'm playing. Elixir U is going to give us on-demand quickness and stability, and the Tool Belt skill will give us another bit of super speed and quickness. Flamethrowers, on the other hand, are the ideal kit when you're following a Zerg and you just want to tag mobs. If you want some on-demand condition cleanse, you can take Purge Gyro, which also makes it much easier to leave combat and mount up again. And if you want some extra defense, you simply take Bulwark Gyro, which will give you access to a barrier, as well as a projectile reflect through the Tool Belt skill. And that brings us to our elite skill. When I'm doing general content or I'm gathering, I usually run the Stealth Gyro. This skill gives us a very long duration stealth, super speed and quickness. This is ideal when you're gathering nodes or you want to quickly loot a chest without getting into combat. If you want access to a very long range attack instead, you should be equipping the mortar kit. And if you're fighting tough mobs and you don't have use for any of these, you can simply take the supply crate. This is a set and forget elite skill that spawns turrets all around you. Now before diving into the gear, I do have a few extra tips. First of all, don't be afraid to experiment with the different traits and utilities. Engineers have so many great options and combinations, you can adapt this spec to your preferences. An example would be the Scrapper trait line. If you combine mass momentum with applied force, you might not have super speed and quickness, but instead you'll have access to stability which grants you might, and vice versa. And if you combine this with a flamethrower, no mob will ever knock you down. If you're lacking some sustain, you simply take rapid generation instead of object in motion. This might sacrifice some of your damage, but instead you get a decent amount of health regeneration for simply having swiftness or super speed. Next, don't neglect your tool belt skills. Having 5 extra skills to use at your convenience gives you so many more ways to adapt to different situations you might be facing in the open world. And a final one that might be a game changer if you're playing with grenades or mortars. In the options in general settings, I always enable ground targeting, fast switch range indicator, and lock ground target at maximum skill range. This will make it so my ground targeted skills cast when I release my skill button instead of having to click on the ground again. And the lock at max range makes it so that my target reticle can't go further than the max range so that I'm not accidentally cancelling skills because an enemy is too far. Additionally, if grenades or mortars are an issue for you because you're having some difficulty following the target with your mouse all the time, there's an option called Snap Ground Target to Current Target. This will snap the reticle to your current target so that it becomes a targeted skill instead of a ground target. This option makes for very relaxed open world gameplay, but watch out when you're playing endgame PvE, world versus world or PvP, as moving targets might make you miss all of your attacks. If you don't want to go to the options all the time to enable or disable this setting, there's actually a keybind that you can attribute to that switches between these playstyles. I personally have it bound on a key that is on the far right side of my keyboard so that I don't accidentally press it, but I also don't need to open the options every time I want to swap these settings. And if you're still with me, this brings me to the gear. I currently use 3 Berserker's pieces and 3 Diviner's pieces for my armor, Berserker's trinkets and Diviner's weapons. On my weapon, I choose a Sigil of Force and a Sigil of Concentration. This will bring me to around 50% boon duration, so I don't really have to worry about maintaining quickness too much on myself. Again, feel free to play around and experiment with the stats yourself if you prefer another combination. You can swap out Berserker pieces for Marauders for some more survivability. If you want, you can go full Diviner and become the king of boon duration, or maybe you can experiment with some other fun combos. If you only want one gear set that you can also take into endgame content though, I would recommend you to stick with my original setup. And as for the runes, Runes of the Scholar or Eagle are a very nice damage option. And if you want to become near immortal in the open world, you can take Runes of Vampirism, which will regenerate 10% of your health every time you kill an enemy, give you extra power and extra vitality. Now, don't take these runes into endgame content, as again, you'll be sacrificing quite a bit of damage. If there's any interest, I could make a few build guides that focus on builds that you can take both in the open world and group content by simply changing out a few traits, or on optimizing gear sets so you have a power boon set that allows you to play both Power Quickness Scrapper and Power Alacrity Mechanist. Let me know if this is something you would like. And that's also it for this video. If you have any other comments or questions, make sure to leave them down below. If you liked it, please like this video, and your subscription would mean the world to me.